Hey guys, we're now just 99 days out from the 2022 Senate election, so as we enter the month of August, I'll be updating you guys on my new Senate map prediction for the races that we have this November. And so despite Joe Biden remaining unpopular nationwide, Democrats' chances at retaining control of the upper chamber are now the highest they have ever been over the last 2 years. 538 currently gives Democrats a 56% chance at retaining control of the upper chamber. And if you look at the current map here, 50-50 for both parties. Democrats did underperform in 2020 with losses in Maine, Iowa, and North Carolina, but they did make impressive flips in the states of Colorado, Arizona, and then Georgia with those two races. And so looking at the 2022 generic ballot, Republicans are ahead by 0.4%, so basically a virtual tie between both parties. Republicans did maintain a 2-point lead over the beginning of this year, however their lead has shrunk now to 0.4%. Democrats are doing better than they have ever done, and so right now the race for the upper chamber in 2022 is more competitive than it has ever been. And so, of course, I'm going to start off by filling in the solid states for both parties. So starting off with the solid blue states, Patty Murray, I do expect to win by a solid margin in Washington, so I am going to categorize Washington as being a solid Democratic state once again. Her polling numbers have really improved over the last couple of weeks. And for the GOP here, I am going to include the state of Utah as a solid Republican state, even though Evan McMullin is polling within 10% of Mike Lee. As an independent, he's probably going to underperform expectations, so Utah I do still have as being a solid Republican state. And so basically a solid state is a state in which either party has an over 95% chance of winning, or they're expected to win by a margin of over 15%. Basically, these are the states that the other party has absolutely no chance at winning. So now we are left with 12 remaining competitive races. It is these 12 races that are going to decide the makeup of the upper chamber for the next 2 years, and these are really the races that really could go both ways. And so instead of going from likely, lean to tilt, I'm actually going to start off with the state of New Hampshire and move from right to left to make this a bit more interesting. And so basically a likely rating means that one party has a significant advantage in this race, but it may still be pretty competitive. A lean state means that one party has a slight edge, but the race really could so very much go both ways. And a tilt state is the most competitive rating that I can give to a state, and basically what this means is that both parties have a very good shot, but one party may have a very, very slight advantage. And so all three of these ratings mean that a race is going to be competitive, but at varying degrees. So starting off in the state of New Hampshire, this is a race that Maggie Hassan is defending. She was first elected in 2016 when she defeated Republican incumbent Kelly Ayotte, winning by the closest margin of the 2016 Senate election cycle, winning just 47.98% of the vote to Ayotte's 47.84%. So Hassan was elected in a very competitive race 6 years ago, but this was also a flip for the Democratic Party, and only one of two flips that year. If you look at the 2016 map here, the only two flips were in New Hampshire and Illinois. So Maggie Hassan did win a very impressive victory 6 years ago, and so now she's expected to face off against either Chuck Morse or Donald Boldeau. Both of these Republicans are frontrunners right now in the running to be the Republican nominee for this race, but really there has been no reliable polls conducted in New Hampshire for the GOP primary, so we're just going to have to wait and see what happens on the primary that occurs on the 13th of September. And if you look at the polls between Hassan and Boldeau, Maggie Hassan leads by 4%, and between Hassan and Morse, Hassan leads by a margin of 4.3%. However, Morse has led in one of the polls conducted by the University of New Hampshire against Maggie Hassan in a head-to-head matchup. So Hassan may not be as solid as previously expected, but I do still think that she will win her re-election. She will still be in a competitive race just like 2016, but I do think that she can win by over 1%. So I am going to categorize the state of New Hampshire as being a lean Democratic state. I think that she can win by around 2 to 3%, but it will be very competitive nonetheless. And next up, we have the state of Pennsylvania. The race here is probably one of the highest profile races this year, and this, of course, is the race between TV personality Mehmet Oz and Democratic Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman. Both of these candidates have been stuck in a very vicious race for the last couple of months, and Mehmet Oz has proven to be a disappointment to the Republican Party. John Fetterman is destroying Oz in basically every single statistic. He is leading in the polls by a significant margin, and in terms of fundraising, Mehmet Oz has nothing on John Fetterman. If you look at the latest polls released released for this race, John Fetterman does lead by a margin of 8.3%. Now, I do not believe that Mehmet Oz is going to lose by an 8% margin, but I do not think that he is going to win. If you look at all of the most recent polls, John Fetterman leads by double digits in many of them, and so I'm not just basing this prediction off of the polls. There really are a lot of factors that I look at, but looking at the polls here, it is indisputable that John Fetterman is in a very good position going into this race. However, if you look at the 2016 race, Pat Toomey was actually expected to lose his re-election to McGuinty, and if you look at the polls for that race, I mean, Pete McGuinty led in basically all of the final polls released, and she still ended up losing by a margin of 1.4%. So Pennsylvania polls do tend to overestimate Democrats, and so right now I do still have John Fetterman winning, but by a much less margin of around 2 to 3%. So Pennsylvania is also going to be a lean state for the Democrats. In the state of North Carolina, we have another seat that Republicans are defending without an incumbent. Richard Burr has chosen not to run for a third term in office after being reelected in 2016. So North Carolina is probably going to be a bit more competitive than it would be if Burr was renominated. And so if you look at this race here between Ted Budd and Sherry Beasley, it is one of the closest ones that we have, but I do think that Republicans are going to outperform the polling expectations here as well, just like in Pennsylvania. Republicans do only lead on average by 1%, with Budd at just 44.6%, and many of the most recent polls actually show Beasley leading. However, Democrats are probably not going to win this race. North Carolina is a state that Democrats have been trying to flip for a very long time, and they have been unsuccessful so far. If you look at the 2020 race, this really was their best chance to do so. However, with Cal Cunningham's scandal in early October, his chances of winning basically went away. Even though he was leading in all the final polls, he still ended up losing this race, and so without that scandal in 2020, Cal Cunningham probably would have won his seat, and right now the Senate would have been 51-49. However, with the fact that Tom Tillis was able to defeat Cal Cunningham, it seems very difficult for Sherry Beasley to defeat Ted Budd. Budd may not be the best nominee, but Sherry Beasley, there's nothing too special about her either. So right now, North Carolina, I have as a lean Republican state. I think it's going to be around a 4 to 5% margin for Ted Budd. I do not expect Democrats to win here, but I do think that Sherry Beasley will remain very competitive in the race nonetheless. In the Peach State, we have a very competitive race, just like Pennsylvania. It's going to be make or break for the Democrats, and we have a very interesting matchup here as well. Raphael Warnock and Herschel Walker, two very different candidates. Walker is, of course, a former football player that won the Heisman Trophy, so in Georgia, he was very popular at the very beginning of his campaign. However, over the last 2 years, his comments on the campaign trail have made it so that a lot of voters in Georgia have soured on him, and if you look at the most recent polls, Warnock leads by a margin of 3%. And unlike Pennsylvania and North Carolina, polls in Georgia are very accurate. They are very accurate in predicting the wins for Jon Ossoff and Raphael Warnock in 2021, and they were also accurate in predicting the electoral victory of Joe Biden on the presidential level in 2020 as well. So polls in Georgia have not been very far off from the actual results, and so a 3% lead is significant for Raphael Warnock, especially considering the fact that if you look at the governor polls, Brian Kemp on average leads by 5%. So no, it is not Republicans doing poorly in Georgia, it is just Herschel Walker. If you look at the polls at the very beginning of this year, Walker was leading in most of the polls that were conducted, and so Walker did come into this race with an advantage, but over the last couple of months he has lost that, and Raphael Warnock has now taken a commanding lead. So right now I have the state of Georgia as a lean Democratic state. I think it's going to be a margin of around 1 to 3% for Raphael Warnock. I don't think he's going to outperform the polls, but I do think that right now he is in a very good position going into his re-election. And the final race we have here in the Southeast is, of course, the one in Florida, where Marco Rubio is running for his third term in office. He was easily reelected in 2016 against Patrick Murphy, winning 52% of the vote, and 52% in the Sunshine State really is very impressive. And so if you look at the latest polls between Rubio and Demings, I mean, Val Demings, looking at just the numbers alone, really does not stand too much of a chance. Rubio is up on average by 9%, and Val Demings has only led in one out of all of these polls that have been conducted in the state. Marco Rubio is one of the most popular senators in the country, and if you look at the overall 2022 map, really Florida is not going to be one of the races that Democrats can flip this November. So Florida is going to be a likely Republican state. I think Marco Rubio is going to win by around 10 to 15%. I don't think a solid margin is possible quite yet for the Republicans in Florida, but I still think that Marco Rubio is going to win with a very commanding margin. And now coming back up to the Midwest, we're going to look at the race in Ohio between J.D. Vance and Tim Ryan. J.D. Vance is the Republican nominee for this race. He was chosen to succeed Rob Portman, who was reelected in 2016 by over 21 percentage points. But if you look at the race this year, J.D. Vance is not even leading in the polls. Tim Ryan is actually ahead by a margin of 2.1%. Now, granted, these polls that have been released showing Tim Ryan ahead, they really have not been the best polls. Not a single one of these polls has good methodology. However, the fact that they all show Ryan ahead is still very significant. However, in the end, this is a state that Donald Trump won by a significant margin in both 2016 and 2020 after flipping it in 2016. Ohio really used to be a bellwether state for the last 6 decades, but now it is very much a Republican state. Even though it is not solid for the GOP, it is very much a likely Republican state. And if you look at the 2020 presidential election polls, I mean, Joe Biden wildly underperformed expectations, losing the state by 8% despite only being expected to lose it by 0.8%. So if you look at the Senate election here in 2022, even though Tim Ryan is up by a margin of 2.1%, it is very unlikely that he ends up winning. I think Tim Ryan is running a very strong campaign against J.D. Vance, but really J.D. Vance's advantage in terms of just his partisanship is going to make the difference here. So right now I do have Ohio as a lean Republican state. Really it should be likely or maybe even solid, but I think that J.D. Vance is going to struggle here, and I think that he is going to win by a margin of less than 5%. So Ohio is going to be very competitive, much more competitive than even Florida, but in the end, Democrats are probably not going to win, even with Tim Ryan as the nominee. Next up, we have the state of Wisconsin, in which Ron Johnson is running for his 3rd term in office. Basically, out of all of the races that we've covered so far, Wisconsin is probably the least polled state. And if you look at the races in both 2016 and 2010, Ron Johnson defeated Russ Feingold, the former senator that was first elected in 1992. So the Democratic Party has not been as dominant in Wisconsin as they were in the 90s and the early 2000s. So the Democratic Party is going to struggle here once again in 2022. Yes, Ron Johnson is very unpopular in his state, but the Democratic Party is not too popular in Wisconsin as much as it was before either. If you look at the polling that's been done for this race, yes, Barnes is ahead, but most of these political sources do rank the Wisconsin race as being tilted lean or even solid Republican according to GHQ. I think this is a massive mistake from them, but still the Republican Party is slightly favored in Wisconsin. It's, in my opinion, on par with North Carolina in terms of how competitive the race is. Ron Johnson is a very weak nominee, and even though he is the incumbent, he is going to face a lot of trouble over the next couple of months. We're just going to have to see and wait for new data to come out. He's not doing that well in terms of fundraising either, but still, he is in a good position going into his re-election side, Wisconsin, as a lean Republican state as well. And to finish off the eastern half of the U.S., we have the 2 races in Iowa and Missouri. So starting off with the Iowa race, Chuck Grassley is running for his 8th term in office. He was first elected in 1980, and Michael Franken is probably going to be the best nominee from the Democrats that Grassley has faced off against since his first race in 1980. Michael Franken currently is only polling 6 points behind on average against Grassley, and if you look at the last couple of elections for Chuck Grassley, you see a very negative trajectory for him. In 2004, he was re-elected to a 5th term by a margin of 42%. In 2010, this margin shrunk to 31%, and most recently in 2016, Chuck Grassley only won by 24%. So as Grassley has gotten older, he has become less and less popular in his state in terms of winning another term. In 2022, if he won again, he would serve all the way until 2029, and he really would be pushing it with his age. He would be closer to 100 than 90 if he finishes his next term. So Michael Franken does stand a chance in this race, but still Chuck Grassley, by all accounts, is probably going to win. So right now I do have Iowa as a likely Republican state. I think there's no doubt that Grassley is going to win, but Michael Franken is going to remain very competitive in Iowa, just like Democrats are going to remain competitive in a state like North Carolina or Ohio. In Missouri, the primary is going to be held on the 2nd of August. However, Trudy Valentine is probably going to win the Democratic nomination, and Eric Schmidt is probably going to be the Republican nominee. Looking at the GOP nomination here, Eric Schmidt currently has 33% support in the state, and Vicky Hartzer is second with 24%. She, of course, has the endorsement of Josh Hawley. I think that she could surprise and end up winning, but I don't think that Eric Grimes is going to be the nominee in this race, and that's a very good thing for the GOP. He performs terribly against both Lucas Coons and Trudy Valentine. On the Democratic side, we have a two-way race between Coons and Valentine. Right now, Trudy Valentine is expected to win the nomination. She has led in all of the most recent polls, and Lucas Coons, he was a frontrunner for a very long time, but it seems like he's not going to end up winning the nomination. So if you look at the hypothetical polls between Eric Schmidt and Trudy Valentine, you will see that Schmidt has led in every single one of those polls. I don't think that should be too surprising to anyone at all. Missouri is, of course, a state that voted for Donald Trump by a solid margin in 2016 and 2020, and so the most recent poll actually shows Schmidt only up by a margin of 6%. Other polls do show him leading by much more. I think that Schmidt is going to win by double digits, and of course, if you look at the 2018 race here, Josh Hawley defeated Claire McCaskill, who was the Democratic incumbent, by a margin of 5.8%. In 2012, McCaskill won her re-election by 16 percentage points, so Missouri really is not the toss-up seat that it once was. So in 2022, Democrats are not going to flip Missouri. They have absolutely no chance. Even though Roy Blunt is not running for his re-election, Missouri is still going to be a likely Republican state, this being their 49th state on our map. And moving on to the state of Colorado, Democrats have a significant advantage in this race with Michael Bennet as their incumbent. Bennet was first appointed in 2009 and then re-elected in both 2010 and 2016. In 2016, he won by around 5%, defeating Darrell Glenn, winning 50% of the vote. So this time around, he will be challenged by Joe Dea. Joe Dea narrowly defeated Ron Hanks with 55% of the vote in the Republican primary. And so if you look at this race, the only poll that has been conducted shows Michael Bennet ahead by a margin of 13%, and Democrats are pretty much guaranteed to win here in Colorado. The margin may be lower than 10%, maybe even higher, but Michael Bennet is in a very good position. He's in good standing in his state, and if you look at the 2020 presidential election, Joe Biden won Colorado by 14%, and the Senate election in 2020 saw the election of John Hickenlooper by a margin of 9.3%, and he, of course, defeated Republican incumbent Cory Gardner. So the Democratic Party is probably not going to lose in Colorado. Yes, Joe Dea may be competitive, but Michael Bennet is almost guaranteed to win this race. So Colorado is going to be a likely Democratic state, this also being their now 49th state. So we still have a very competitive race with just 2 states left to go. Now, the 2 seats held in Nevada and Arizona are both currently held by Democrats. Mark Kelly was first elected in 2020 in the special election, so that is why he is up for re-election just in 2022, only 2 years later. And in Nevada, Kathleen Cortez Masto was elected regularly in 2016. So looking at the Arizona race, Mark Kelly currently is the presumptive Democratic nominee once again. He defeated Martha McSally in 2020. It was a big win for Democrats, and of course, after Kelly's win, both Senate seats in Arizona were occupied by Democrats. So this November, Mark Kelly is probably going to face off against Blake Masters. Masters has, I believe, an 80 to 90% chance currently at winning the Republican primary on the 2nd of August, so just in one day as of this recording. And Blake Masters is at 40% in the most recent polls, so really, he is almost guaranteed to win the nomination. He, of course, did receive the endorsement of Donald Trump. That really is what boosted him in the last couple of months. And if you look at the hypothetical polls between Mark Kelly and Blake Masters polls the worst out of all 3 of the frontrunners in this race. Jim Lamont and Barack Bronovich both poll better against Mark Kelly than Blake Masters, so this is probably going to be another mistake for the GOP in Arizona now, and Mark Kelly leads by significant margins in basically every single one of the polls against any of these potential Republican candidates. Yes, they have not won the GOP primary yet, but still, Mark Kelly's numbers are very, very good. He's at 50% in many of these polls, and so right now, Mark Kelly is looking very strong. If you look at his 2020 race, he defeated Martha McSally by a 2.4% margin, the same margin that Kyrsten Sinema had in 2018. So Arizona on the Senate level has become a state that Democrats have been doing very, very well in, and Martha McSally's loss in 2020 just further solidifies the fact that Arizona has shifted significantly to the left over the last couple of decades, and that is what's going to help Democrats carry Arizona once again. I have Arizona as a lean state for Mark Kelly. I think he'll win by a similar margin to the one he had in 2020. And finally, in the state of Nevada, I typically do not categorize states as being toss-ups, but for right now, I am going to categorize Nevada as being a toss-up race, but I do believe that Democrats do have the slightest of edges. If I were to have to choose one party over the other, I would choose the Democrats right now, but in all honesty, it's going to be one of the most competitive races that we have. I think Kathleen Cortez Masto is the most vulnerable Democrat on the ballot, so really, I'm saying that Nevada is pretty much a pure toss-up, but I do believe that Democrats do have a very slight edge here, so hear me out. Democrats Democratic Party does have an advantage in Nevada. Nevada is still a state that's voted for Democrats in the last 4 presidential elections, and of course in 2016, Catherine Cortez Masto was elected by a margin of 2.4%, and so that may not have been the strongest margins, but incumbents typically do not lose their re-elections, and so Adam Laxalt as a candidate lost to Steve Sisolak in 2018. I think that he was not the best nominee for the Republican Party. If you look at the governor election here, Steve Sisolak leads by a margin of 1.9% against Joe Lombardo, so Democrats are doing okay in Nevada. If you look at the Senate polls, it's a bit worse for Masto, but she's up by a margin of 1.5%, and according to all of the most recent polls, Masto is ahead. Laxalt has not led in a single poll since all the way back in mid-April, so the polling numbers right now do show a Masto win, and on average, if you average out just the most recent polls over the last couple of months, she leads by a margin much larger than 1.5%. She's only up by 1.5 because 538 weighs all of the polls that have been conducted. So right now I do have Nevada as being tilted, but really it could go both ways. But as of right now, I do believe Democrats are slightly favored to win the Senate. I do think that they will hold on to the majority with 50 to 51 seats. And so I do believe Democrats right now are going to hold on to both Arizona and Georgia and even flip Pennsylvania, this probably being one of the only flips of the year. Wisconsin, Ohio, North Carolina, I believe are going to remain in the Republican column, even though Republicans don't have incumbents in both Ohio and North Carolina. So right now, I think Democrats do have a very slight advantage, but these Senate elections are going to remain very competitive, and a lot can still change in just 3 months. So this is my updated 2022 Senate election prediction as of the 1st of August, 2022. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure you like it down below if you enjoyed it. Comment down below which party you think will win the Senate elections this November and which races you agree with in terms of how I called them on this map. Subscribe to my channel if you have not. Consider purchasing a channel membership for just 99 cents per month for extra perks on this channel, and I will see you guys in the next video.